Think about the last time someone proved you wrong. Really wrong. How did it feel? Not embarrassing, threatening, like an attack. That wasn't your ego protecting itself. That was your neurology. And somewhere, someone figured that out and built an entire system around it. In 2025, researchers put people inside brain scanners and showed them statements that contradicted their deepest beliefs, political beliefs, personal beliefs, things they'd staked their identity on. They were waiting to see which part of the brain would respond. They expected the reasoning centers to activate, the parts responsible for logic, analysis, and critical thought. That's not what happened. What lit up were the emotional centers, the threat detection systems, the same neural machinery that fires when something is trying to hurt you. Your brain did not treat new information as data. It treated it as a danger. Here's why. For 200,000 years, certainty kept you alive. If you were certain the sound in the grass was a predator, and you were wrong, you lost a few seconds of foraging. If you were uncertain, and you were wrong, you were dead. Hesitation was fatal. Certainty was survival. Your brain learned that lesson completely. It never unlearned it, and it rewards you for it. Every time you land on a firm belief, every time ambiguity resolves into conviction, your brain releases dopamine. The same neurochemical is behind food, sex, substances. Being right doesn't just feel good, it feels like surviving. And here's what no one tells you. When you feel defensive, when your chest tightens and your mind starts hunting for reasons the other person is wrong, that is not a weakness. That is not immaturity. That is not a failure of intelligence or character. That is 200,000 years of survival code running exactly as designed. You were never broken. You were just never given the manual. But here's the problem with ancient hardware in a modern world. The system that kept your ancestors alive is now being run in an environment it was never built for. One where the threats are news headlines, comment sections, political arguments, ideas that challenge who you think you are. The biology hasn't changed. The world has completely. And the gap between those two things is being exploited deliberately, systematically, at scale. Because when you understand exactly how certainty hijacks your brain, the neurochemistry, the threat response, the tribal wiring underneath it all, you stop being a passive participant in that system. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why your brain physically resists being wrong, why confronting someone with evidence can make them believe harder, not less, why ambiguity causes measurable anxiety, and why that anxiety is the exact lever that algorithms, media, and political systems are pulling right now, today, every time you open your phone. Not to scare you, to show you the mechanism, because you can't override a system you can't see. So, let's look at what's actually happening inside your head when someone tells you something you don't want to hear. Let's start with dopamine. You've heard the word. It gets used loosely, the feel-good chemical, the reward molecule. But that framing undersells it significantly. Dopamine is not a flood of good feeling washing over your brain. New research from the University of Colorado, published in 2025, found that it operates more like a precision delivery system, sending targeted signals to specific neural pathways at exact moments in time. It's not a mood, it's a message. And one of the most powerful messages it sends is this: you got it right. Here's what that looks like neurologically. Deep in the brain sits a structure called the ventral tegmental area, the VTA. It's one of the brain's primary hubs for dopamine production. And researchers from Harvard, McGill, and the University of Geneva discovered something remarkable about how it operates. The VTA doesn't fire when you receive a reward. It fires in anticipation of one. Which means the rush, the surge of certainty, the satisfaction of being right begins before the argument is even settled, before the evidence is in, before anyone has conceded anything. Your brain is already rewarding you for the conviction itself, for the feeling of knowing. Now layer something else on top of that. Research from Virginia Tech, published in 2025, found that dopamine and serotonin are released in specific brain regions when we process the emotional meaning of words, not just actions, not just physical experiences, words, the language of certainty. I know, I'm right. Obviously, everyone can see it. Literally triggers reward chemistry. You are not just thinking your beliefs, you are medicating with them. And like any drug, the come down matters. When certainty is challenged, when something disrupts the conviction, introduces doubt, forces ambiguity, the brain doesn't respond with curiosity. It responds with something much closer to withdrawal. Studies measuring neural activity during moments of uncertainty found consistent activation of the anterior cingulate cortex. That's the region responsible for error detection, for conflict monitoring. It's also one of the primary regions associated with physical pain. Ambiguity doesn't just feel uncomfortable. To your brain, it registers in the same architecture as being hurt. And this is where it becomes important to understand the evolutionary logic. Because it isn't random. It isn't a design flaw. Your ancestors lived in environments where ambiguity had real consequences, where hesitation, genuine cognitive hesitation, the kind that comes from weighing two competing possibilities, could cost you your life. The predator in the grass, the stranger approaching the camp, the food that might be poisonous. The brain that resolved uncertainty fastest survived longest. Certainty was not a luxury, it was a selection pressure. The most certain brains were the ones that made it to the next generation. You are the descendant of the ones who were sure. And your brain still operates on that logic. Every single day, it rewards conviction, it punishes doubt, it treats ambiguity as a threat and certainty as survival. Regardless of whether the belief is accurate, regardless of whether the evidence supports it, regardless of whether being certain about this particular thing in this particular moment matters at all. The system doesn't know the difference between a predator in the grass and a political opinion on your phone. It just knows what feels like safety. So before we go any further, understand what we're actually talking about. This is not a character flaw. This is not a failure of education or intelligence. Studies consistently show that confirmation bias operates at the same intensity regardless of IQ, regardless of how much someone knows. You are not poorly designed. You are running a system that was brilliant for a world that no longer exists.
Your brain rewards being right the same way it rewards eating, the same way it rewards connection, the same chemistry, the same circuitry, which means changing your mind isn't just intellectually difficult, it's neurologically expensive.
So now you understand the reward side of the system. Certainty feels like survival. Dopamine reinforces conviction. Ambiguity registers as pain. But that's only half of what's happening, because the brain doesn't just reward being right, it punishes being wrong. In the 1950s, a social psychologist named Leon Festinger did something unusual. He joined a doomsday cult, not because he believed in it, because he wanted to see what would happen when their prophecy failed. The group had predicted the world would end on December 21st, 1954. They had left their jobs, abandoned relationships, given away possessions. They were certain. December 21st came and went. Nothing happened. What Festinger expected to find was collapse, embarrassment, the quiet dispersal of people confronting the fact that they were wrong. That's not what happened. Most of the group didn't abandon their beliefs. They strengthened them. The failed prophecy became evidence of their own spiritual power. The world had been saved, they decided, because of their faith. The disconfirmation was reframed, absorbed, converted into confirmation. Festinger called what he observed cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort produced when reality contradicts a deeply held belief. And he identified the mechanism the mind uses to resolve it, not by updating the belief, by protecting it. This is not a fringe phenomenon. This is not something that only happens to cult members or the ideologically extreme. Brain scanner studies, in which participants were presented with statements that challenged their political beliefs, found the same pattern. The emotional centers were activated, the threat detection systems fired, and then, consistently and reliably, participants began generating counterarguments, not evaluating the evidence, dismissing it. The researchers described what they observed as an active reduction of cognitive dissonance. The brain wasn't making a reasoning error. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect the self. Now here's where it gets more complicated and more interesting. You may have heard of something called the backfire effect. The idea that when you confront someone with facts that contradict their beliefs, they don't just resist, they double down. The correction makes the belief stronger. That effect is real. But the research has a nuance worth understanding. Backfire effects are not universal. A 2020 review of the scientific literature found they occur most powerfully in a specific condition when the belief is load-bearing, when it's tied to identity, to the tribe, to the story someone tells about who they are and where they belong. The more a belief is fused with selfhood, the more threatening its revision becomes, which means the backfire effect isn't a bug in a few broken people. It's a feature, activated in all of us whenever the stakes are high enough. And this is where the evolutionary logic completes itself. Human beings are not solo survival machines. We are tribal animals. For the vast majority of our existence, survival meant belonging to a group, a community, a collective with shared beliefs and shared identity. Exile wasn't inconvenient. Exile was a death sentence, which means the beliefs your tribe holds are not just opinions. They are membership credentials. Revising them publicly, admitting you were wrong about something your group holds true, is not just intellectually uncomfortable. To the ancient circuitry still running your brain, it feels like risking exclusion. It feels like the grass is moving. So when you resist changing your mind, you are not being irrational. You are following a logic so deep it predates language, predates civilization, predates everything except the fundamental need to stay alive and stay connected. The psychologist Peter Maris argued that abandoning a conviction is psychologically similar to working through grief. The mind doesn't release a belief, it mourns it. And like grief, it will do almost anything to avoid initiating that process. Now, who knows this? The answer is everyone who is trying to influence you. Political strategists, platform architects, media organizations, advertising systems. They are not guessing at your psychology. They have studied it, mapped it, and built their systems around its precise contours. They know that a belief tied to identity is almost impossible to dislodge with evidence, so they work to tie beliefs to identity as quickly as possible. They know that tribal epistemology means people believe what their group believes, so they manufacture groups, accelerate polarization, and make the boundaries between in-group and out-group as sharp and emotionally charged as they can. They know that certainty feels like survival, so they sell certainty. Constantly, on every channel, at every volume, not because they necessarily believe what they're telling you, because a certain mind is a predictable mind, and a predictable mind is a useful one. The physicist Max Planck, near the end of his life, made an observation about how scientific consensus actually changes. He said it doesn't happen by convincing people they're wrong. It happens because the people who are wrong eventually die. And a new generation grows up that never held the old belief in the first place. That's how resistant the mind is to revision, even among scientists, even among people whose entire professional identity is built around following evidence. The update doesn't happen inside a person. It happens between generations. So the question isn't whether you are susceptible to this. you are. Measurably, neurologically, inevitably, you are. The question is whether you know what's being done with it.
The systems built around your certainty addiction are not accidents. They are products, engineered to keep you convinced, outraged, and tribal, because that combination keeps you engaged, and engagement is the commodity. You are not the customer. You are the resource.
So here we are. You now know what's happening underneath. The dopamine loop, the threat response, the tribal wiring. The system's built to exploit all three simultaneously. And it would be easy at this point to look outward, to point at the platforms, the media, and the political machinery, to feel righteous about understanding the mechanism. But that would be doing exactly what the mechanism wants you to do, because the most uncomfortable part of this isn't what they're doing to you. It's what you're doing to yourself. Think about the beliefs you hold most tightly, not the casual ones, not preferences or opinions, the ones that feel like facts, the ones you would defend in an argument without pausing to consider whether you should, the ones where, if someone pushed back, you'd feel it somewhere physical, in your chest, behind your eyes, at the back of your throat. Now ask yourself something honest. When did you last examine one of those beliefs from the outside? Not to abandon it, not to perform open-mindedness, but to genuinely hold it up to the light and ask, where did this come from? What am I getting from being certain about this? What would I have to lose if I were wrong? Because here's what the research actually shows about intellectual humility. It is not a personality trait. It is not something you either have or don't. Studies published in PLOS One found that the capacity to hold beliefs with less rigidity is trainable. Measurably, demonstrably trainable, with medium to large effect sizes. The most effective technique isn't being told you're wrong. It isn't being presented with better evidence. It's being asked before you fully formed an opinion to generate explanations for why the opposite might be true, not to believe the opposite, just to understand how someone could. That single cognitive move, practiced consistently, is enough to begin loosening the grip, not eliminating the certainty drive. You cannot eliminate it. It is structural. It is ancient. It is, in the truest sense, who you are at a biological level. But you can learn to notice it as it activates. You can learn to feel the dopamine spike of conviction and pause, just long enough to ask whether this particular certainty is yours, or whether it was handed to you by something that needed you to be certain. That pause is small. Its consequences are not. Because this is what the certainty economy depends on, the gap between the feeling and the question, the moment the dopamine hits and before any examination begins. That gap is where you are most valuable to the systems built around your biology. Close the gap, even slightly, and the entire architecture loses some of its grip on you. Not all of it, but some, and some is where it starts. You were never broken. You were never irrational. You were never uniquely susceptible in a way that other, smarter, better people aren't. You were human, running human software, in a world that learned to weaponize it before you knew it could be weaponized. Now you know.
Every system we've talked about today, the dopamine loop, the backfire effect, the tribal wiring, they all depend on one thing, that you never stop to question what you're certain about. So I'll leave you with this. What's one thing you're certain about that you've never once questioned?
What are you certain about that you've never once questioned? And what happens when someone makes you feel certain that you should be furious?